Fundamentals provides specialized roles for accounting users in nonprofit governments, as well as specialized roles for team members and managers of team members who are light or team or limited users of Business Central. I am selecting the team member role here. And with that, you'll see that Microsoft has some certain restrictions in Business Central in terms of what non-full users can do in the system. These users are called team users. Team users are allowed to process approvals, enter timesheets. With Fundamentals, we add the ability to enter expense reports and purchase requisitions. And then Business Central in general does allow users to enter purchase quotes and sales quotes, but not purchase invoices and purchase credit memos. They can view these, but they can't actually enter them or edit them. Team members are also allowed to edit vendor records, existing vendor records, but they're not allowed to enter new vendors in the system. So continuing on, the challenges poses for our nonprofit accounting users is they have lots of folks in the field, could be program managers, could be volunteers, could be other schools or sub-organizations who need to instantiate purchasing documents in the system. We're going to focus initially on how do we initiate purchasing transactions in the system. The end result in Business Central typically is a purchase order or a purchase invoice. Microsoft has one primary mechanism for initiating purchase documents in the system, and that's called a purchase quote. If we look at a purchase quote in the system, essentially a quote is very much like a purchase order or purchase invoice in terms of having a header record that specifies a vendor, and many lines that could be coded to GL accounts, items, etc. In our case, we have two line items entered here, one for $6,000, one for $600. They're both coded to GL. You notice one is using the Fundamentals autofill code capability, which when selected automatically fills in a series of values underlying it, so users don't necessarily have to understand the accounting structure in the system. Power users or accountants can set up these catalog items, if you will, to allow the user to make an easier entry when they're not completely familiar with the accounting system. So in this case, we coded a line to travel and we coded another line for $600. Why do we do this? You notice Fundamentals has added line level approvals and document level approvals in the system. Probably one of the most powerful approval engines in almost any ERP product. If we look at the approval entries and check and see what's going on with these lines, you will note that we have triggered two different approval rules here. One is at the header level, i.e. line number 0, and one's for the first line in the system, one for the second line in the system. If we take a quick look at these approval rules, the line level rule is saying if all these GL accounts are in play on what I'm entering in the system, based on normal Business Central filters, and then all these documents are in play, in this case any purchasing document we have in the system, that could also include expense reports. And in this case, I've actually, for demonstration purposes, narrowed my rule down to just selecting the IT department. Once we trigger this gateway, if you will, in that case, if the amount is above $500, we're going to route it to yours truly, J. Malik. And above $500, we're actually going to go through a series of approvals through multiple users in a user group in the system. If we look at the header rule called executive, it's a fairly simple rule. This is plea used to route to director of finance or controller. maybe CFO in the system, depending on the organization's needs. In this case, I'm just triggering a bunch of documents here, and if the amount's about $5,000, it's going to go to user called executive. I just wanted to illustrate that the approval rules in the system can be set up by normal accounting users, not by technical folks, not by consultants, not by developers, especially not by developers, based on the logic that you maintain your system in. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the IT department in both these lines. This is another fundamentals enhancement here to allow users to quickly get to all their dimensions that they have defined in the system. And now you notice, because my rule department, both lines are now valid. The document, however, is still exceeding $5,000, in which case it's going to be for approval. I'm going to go ahead and change my amount here to be under the total threshold of $5,000. And you'll notice that the document is now valid because we're not actually invoking any of our approvals in the system. So this is a purchase quote in the system, and in the base Business Central solution, the purchase quote typically can be processed in the system to create a purchase order. So this is one way to instantiate a purchase order in the system. When we know who the purchase vendor is, obviously, we enter the document, and the team user can go ahead and set this up to generate a purchase order in the system. What Fundamentals adds in here is a couple of additional fields to say, okay, I'm actually entering it as a team user, but when all said and done, I wanted to actually instantiate a purchase invoice in the system. So this is actually a way of not only instantiating a purchase order, but also a purchase invoice in the system. Given that it's a purchase invoice, we're going to have to say something here in the vendor invoice number. So this is a remote user maybe who's just getting invoices sent to vendors to them, and they're just helping out the accounting department by actually setting up the document in the system. Obviously, the document is going to go through the entire flow, and you notice the terminology here changed to make invoice. The make invoice function, again, if you'll recall, team members cannot create invoices in the system. So someone in the accounting department would have to come in here and make invoice. In Fundamentals, we add an option in the system in Purchase Payable Setup. To kind of help the accounting department out to auto-post the quote when it's done. So the team user enters a quote, sends it through the approvals, handles any feedback from approvers in the system, then goes ahead and when it's gone through all the approvals, the system will automatically post the quote, and in this case will create automatically a purchase order or purchase invoice in the system, thereby just teeing it up for full users in the system to continue and process the document. This was just a quick summary of how you can use a purchase quote to enable your non-accounting users out in the field to instantiate a document, go through a complex and sophisticated approval system, and then when all said and done, automatically land a purchase order or a purchase invoice in the system. Having seen how a team user in the organization can create a purchase quote and instantiate either a purchase order or a purchase invoice in the system, the key thing to remember is when using purchase quotes, you have to know who the vendor is going to be. So that's a good way of landing a vendor invoice that's in somebody's hands, or actually initiating a purchase request where the vendor is known and maybe we've already negotiated everything. The alternative that Fundamentals adds to the team user's arsenal is the ability to enter a purchase requisition in the system. The key thing about a purchase requisition is that it is vendor agnostic in its primary construct. Notice there's no vendor on the header. The other key thing about a purchase requisition, similar to our expense reports, is it's being entered by me as a user, but I could actually be entering this on behalf of another user in the organization. It could be an executive assistant entering on behalf of somebody else, or a departmental specialist entering for the whole team in the organization. On our expense reports, we actually have folks who are collecting expense reports for external systems, and they just have managers acting in here to process a whole series of expense reports for many, many users. So in this case, I'm just creating a simple purchase requisition. And in this case, I have 2 lines in the system. I'm not going to trigger all the approval rules. If I did increase these amounts, let's just bump this amount up to maybe $6,000. You will notice that we will start triggering those approval rules again. In this case, you've already seen that the same approval rules that we just showed on purchase quote can be triggered on one or all other types of documents in the system. So let's go ahead and just reset this amount so we're not going to go through the approval flow in the system. What else is unique about the purchase requisition? Purchase requisition uses commodity codes, and a commodity code can be viewed as an internal catalog that actually makes it easier for non-accounting users, again, to understand a catalog of items that the organization set up for them that use human language terms like computers, travel, printers, etc. And you'll notice that behind the scenes, that commodity code is set up to define what GL account it might be hitting, what inventory item might be hitting, and so on. You notice you have both options here. Okay, so this is just a way of masking the complexity of a very sophisticated accounting system from folks who don't actually live in the accounting world on a day-to-day basis. So having selected these, notice we said this is vendor agnostic, and in a typical scenario where we're just collecting requisitions for dozens of people across the organization, we're essentially saying I want things in the system. They may not have actually contacted a vendor, negotiated pricing, etc. And in its rawest term, a purchase requisition is set up this way. They can suggest a vendor maybe, but then it typically will get routed downstream for a procurement purchase requisition review, which we'll cover in a little bit. However, Fundamentals also added the ability, at popular request from our customers, that if we actually specify a vendor, and I'm going to pick up a vendor Office Depot here, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the ubiquitous F8 key to copy the field above. And now I've actually entered 2 lines, and I presumably have pre-selected and know what my costing is going to be. So you could have your team users who want to actually instantiate a purchase order using a purchase requisition, specify the vendor on both lines, and actually invoke the document or the action here to create a purchase order. This action will go ahead when pressed. Go ahead and create. Oh, sorry, I missed a typical step. We do have commitment encumbrance accounting, so I do need to commit my transactions before I process them. And a commitment transaction will generate transaction against budget, so we can track what's available to spend as a net of what's happened after this purchase requisition has been approved and reviewed. Now we should be able to go ahead and create a purchase order. And this is a way for a user of our purchase requisition system to actually directly create a purchase order. Both mechanisms, quotes and requisitions, do allow the instantiation of a purchase order in the system. I did mention that typically a requisition is used differently in the system, and imagine that we're collecting requisitions that have been committed, that have been approved across the whole organization, and everything that's been committed and approved is going to land in the hands of one or more purchasers in the system. And here's all the different requisitions and lines in requisitions that have been submitted and are ready for decisions. And now in this case, in the requisition review process, the purchasing agent can make decisions on, do we want to create a new purchase order? Do I want to take that line and add it to an existing PO? Do I actually want to pull it from inventory or put it out on a request for quote? Create a new purchase quote, add to an existing purchase quote, create a new blanket order, or add to an existing blanket purchase order. Business Central is an awesome ERP product. However, Fundamentals from Tangicloud really soups up the procurement capabilities, and you've just seen a few examples of how we've improved the ability for team users to add more transactions in the system than the base Business Central might allow, through a combination of enhancing the purchase quote capabilities, plus adding a very sophisticated, powerful approval system, combined with the ability to generate purchase requisition documents.